Hello, welcome to our second family history class. This one is called Conducting a Family Analysis. Now let's see if I can share the screen and get everything correct. Okay, you should see my screen that says Conducting a Family Analysis. This is an important step in family history. And so let's go ahead and find out what it is. Conduct a family analysis. This is something we do before we even begin our family history research. We need to examine the information very closely. We'll look to see that the information is accurate, and then we'll look to see if there are any clues for future research. Some traditional family traits that we'll look at, and these traits I use for anyone who lived in the 1800s, and they're mostly specific to the United States, but culturally there are similar traits in different countries. But what we will talk about are the ones that are specific to the 1800s in the US. So the first thing we want to look at is a couple. We want to see how close in age they are. If there is a large gap in age, it often will indicate that this is a second marriage. If there is not a birth year given for either of the parents, we can estimate birth years. And we usually estimate that the husband was about 25 years old and the mother about 22 years old when the first child was born. We can change that information when we get exact dates or find a document that tells us. The first child was usually born within 2 years of the marriage. The children usually follow a birth pattern. They're born every 2 years, every 18 months, every 2.5 years, something in that range until the mother is about 40 or until she dies. Now, in order to conduct this family analysis, you will need a calculator and maybe a notepad to take notes. And I would suggest that you look at a family group record or a family group sheet. You can find this when you go to Family Search and the family tree, go to the person that might be the head of the household. So in this case, it's Thomas Frederick Barrett. And then look on the right side of the person page and scroll down. You'll see down on the lower right-hand side, there is an option to print, and one of the options says family. I suggest that you look at this. You click family, and you will see something like this that is a family group record. It contains information for the father, the mother, and all the children born to them. For our purpose, I actually have created this family or put this family in a personal genealogical software. I felt like it was just easier for us to read. However, I did download the information straight from Family Search. So you will notice as you look at this family, we have a father, mother, and 10 children. You will notice that the dates are not standardized. The places, I even have a place here in a different language. It looks like French. So those are things that you would want to do, but before you do research, you actually want to look at the information that you have. So let's look at Thomas and Abigail, and I have questions listed here. And so the first question is this a first marriage? Possibly, this is a first marriage. The difference between the parents is about 7 years. Thomas was 29 years old and Abigail was 22 years old when they married. So there we go. And looking at the age of the husband and wife could give you some clues. So this is likely Abigail's first marriage, but knowing that Thomas was 29 years when they married, there is a chance that Thomas could have been married before. So the couple married in 1868, and the first child was born in 1869. So interestingly enough, about a month after their marriage was the first child born. Now, do the births of the children follow a pattern? If we look at each one, we could say Frank, the age or years difference between Frank and Charles, there's about a year. If you account for the months, maybe almost a year and a half. Between Charles and Leona, we have 2 years. Between Leona and Ernest, a year and something. Between Ernest and Victor, 3 years. Between Victor and Barbara, we have about a year. Between Barbara and Mamie, about a year. Between Mamie and Mamie, about a year. And this is something we'll come back to. It appears there are 2 Mamies there. Between Mamie and Harry, there are about 2 or 3 years. And we have Harry and Nina. We have 1 year. So the children do seem to be born close together. There's no large gap. We do see one gap of about 3 years. And the Mamie and Mamie, it's possible that those represent the same person. The mother, how old was the mother when the last child was born? She was about 36 years old. And then we've identified a possible duplicate here. Additionally, we can make a list of things that we could do for this family. So the first thing is to standardize the places. Additionally, we could look at a map and we see that the family is in Canada and in Massachusetts. Is that possible? If you see on a map, you might see how close they are. But if they're far apart, it's unlikely. It looks like Thomas was born in Nova Scotia, Canada, and then married in Massachusetts. Abigail died in Massachusetts. Thomas died in New Hampshire. But it looks like all of the children were born in Nova Scotia. So if that's possible, we want to see how close Massachusetts is to Nova Scotia to see if that is really possible. To confirm these things, we can actually look for more ideas on the Research Wiki that we'll talk about more next week. We can search the Canadian census records for 1891, 1881, and 1871 to see where this family was living. We can also, with the census, confirm some of the ages of the children. We could look for a marriage record for the couple, and it's possible that the adults were in the US in 1900. And then there might be an 1861 census for Thomas in Canada. Okay, let's look at our next family. And all of these families are real. This next family is Arthur Campbell and Sarah Mercer. Is this a first marriage? Possibly. They're about 4 years apart in age. How old were they when they married? Arthur was 21 and Sarah was 17. The first child was born about 3 years after the marriage. This might be okay depending on, actually maybe not. I'm just looking, there's no month of when they married. It just says 1819. And we see that the first child was born in 1822 and it was December. So there's a chance, there's enough space there that there could have been another child born before Agnes in December. So that would be something we would want to make a note of. If we look at the spacing of the children, the first child was born, I think we said about 2 or 3 years after they're married. And then we have a spacing of 2 years between Agnes and Joseph. Joseph and William, we have 3 years. William and Comfort, we have 2 years. Comfort and Marshall, we have 5 years. Marshall and Louisa, we have 3 years. Louisa and James, we have 2 years. And then if you look between James and Mary, we're looking at over 100 years. And you may see these kinds of things, but this really is how it was listed. So Mary, it says that she was born in 1932, but if we look further, it says she died in 1856. It's not possible to be born after you died. So the problem here could have been that somebody typed the information in incorrectly, which means that Mary could have been born 1832, which would place her in that gap that we had up there, that 5-year gap. So that would be something I take note of to verify. And then when the last child was born, Sarah was about 37 years old. Again, here are a list of some ideas that we could do. In addition to standardizing everything, the dates and places, we would want to investigate and correct the birth year for Mary Campbell. We would want to look in the 1850 US Census, probably in Pennsylvania. Looks like the father died before this census, but the mother should be there living with her children. Another possibility is, we can see that she died that year. Another possibility is she could have remarried and she might be found under another surname. But we could search other census records from 1840, 1830, and 1820. Those census records show the results, the census results, under the name of the head of household with tally marks representing each person. Additionally, we could look for marriage records in Pennsylvania. Okay, here we have another family. This is a family that represents a man who married at least twice. So if we look at the first marriage that we have here, I'm going to call him Eli Fox, married Diana Lois Fox. Right off the bat, that would be something I would take note of. We have Fox for the husband and as the surname, and Fox for the wife. It's sometimes people forget that women should be listed in with their maiden surname. In this case, somebody might have put that in incorrectly. Additionally, it is possible that her maiden surname could have been Fox, and she married a man by the name of Fox, but that would be something that you would want to verify. So that would be something I would take note of. Okay, as we look at the parents and their ages, they are about 7 years apart. That's not too far, but it's something worth looking at. And if we look at their ages when they got married, we see that Eli was 31 years old. It is very possible that he was married before he married Diana. She was 24 when they married. Okay, the first child was born about 4 years after their marriage. Again, that's too long of a gap. I suspect there were at least another child, maybe 2 children born. So that would be something I would make a note of to look for. And in that particular one, there are not other children to compare. But I would like you to notice when Diana died and the birth of her child. She died about a year after the birth of her child. And it looks like Eli married about 2 years after the death of Diana. On the next one, we'll look at the second marriage closer. Okay, now we're at the second marriage that we have here, possibly the third. Eli is married to Eliza. We already know that this is not a first marriage. There's a gap of 15 years. Eli was 38 and Eliza was 23. And the first child listed here was born about 3 years after they married. If we look closely, that we have a child named Fox, born in 1872, another child named Samuel Fox, born in 1872 with the same birth date. It is possible that they were twins, or it is possible that that's a duplicate. If you look at the places, they were born in different states. Again, that would be something worth investigating very closely. Then between Samuel and George, we have about 4 years, and between George and Diana, another 4 years. That 4 years is kind of a large gap, but it looks like it is a pattern there, so that may be correct. Let's see, mom was about 34 at the birth of her last child. And you may notice that the birth of the last child is Diana Lois Fox. And that happens to be the same name of the woman or the previous wife. And you might wonder if that's a mistake. It was common in this time when a spouse died that the next child born of the same gender would be named after that spouse. So that is not unusual for this time. There are a lot of research ideas, again, standardizing places, look at census records for 1880, 1870, 1860, look for marriage records for both marriages, look on the Family Search Research Wiki, see if the marriage records are available and where they might be, and try to search to see if there were other children in that first marriage that we know about, and try to find the birth records for all of the children. And remember, try to determine if Fox and Samuel Fox are the same. Here's another example of a family. This is James and this is Melissa. This is probably a first marriage. The age difference here is about 5 years. James was 26 and Melissa was 21. The first child was born about a year, actually it was less than a year if you look at the months, after the couple married. If we look at each of the children, there is between John and Clark, we have about 4 years. Between Clark and Mary, we have 2. Between Mary and Melissa, we have 3. Between Melissa and Lewis, we have 2. And look, we have another Lewis. Again, same birth date, but different place of birth, likely a duplicate, but if you look closely, they're listed as different genders. One is listed as male and one is listed as a female, each born in a different state. So that would be something to clarify. Between Lewis and Orville, we have 3 years, and between Orville and Laura, we have 2 years. Melissa was about 38 years old when her last child was born. And looking at the places, usually we would expect to see a westward migration at this time. James was born in Kentucky, married in Illinois, and then headed to Kansas. Melissa was born in New York. We don't have a place of death for her. But if we look at the births of the children, we see Kansas in there, we see Illinois, and we see Kansas again and Illinois. I suspect that the family lived in Kansas at some point. I guess we see that with James, but I'm not positive that the children were born there. So again, we would want to verify where they were born. Unlikely that they went to one place and then back and forth. Here are some research ideas: standardize everything and search for census records, 1850, 1860. That could solve some of our questions with regard to where people were born. Look for a marriage record in Adams County, Illinois, and maybe look at the historical and biographical information about this family. Maybe there's something available there. A new family. This is George Henry Moyle and Cora Virginia Nelson. And George is from New Jersey and Cora is from New York. And then we see children born in California. So let's see, it appears that George could have been married before. He is about 10 years older than Cora. Cora was 20 when they married and George was 30. And looking closely, because we're trying to see how long after the marriage the first child was born, we can see that Nellie was born before the couple married. If George was married before, it's likely that Nellie is from his first marriage, and it seems to suggest that she may have been born in New York. So we have the marriage of 1865, and we do have a child born in 1865 in California. If we look at from the child number 2 on down, the spacing seems to be a year between James and Thomas. Between Thomas and George, we have about 3 years. Between George and Nellie, we have about 2. And between Nellie and Lotta, we have about 3. And Lotta and Moyle, we have 2. Cora was about 31 when we see the last child born here. And again, we do see a westward migration, but this is a great distance. That would be an interesting story to figure out. Also, you may notice let's see here. We have two girls by the name of Nellie. We have the first child and the fifth child. That is typically unusual to have two Nellies by the same, living at the same time. So that would be something I would want to research. And ideas of things we could do, standardized places, look in the census, 1880, 1870, figure out if we can solve the Nellie problem, find a marriage record in California, use the Family Search Research Wiki for California and find out when vital records are available. Search to see if there are birth records available in California. And California has a neat collection called voter registration records, which may give some more specific information about George and any of the men as they're eligible to vote. Okay, so this, okay, let's go back here. So this was George Henry Moyle and Cora Virginia Nelson. And this is one of the children, I believe, James. Yeah, James, the second child. So let's look at James's family here. James is married to Elizabeth Forbes Borland. And then we see the couple below is Elizabeth's next husband, which is William Hector Osmond. So let's look at the first one. James was 25, Elizabeth was 21 when they married. There's about 4 years difference. Elizabeth is from Ireland, but it looks like they married in California and she died in California. There are two children listed and they're about 4 years apart and 4 years after the couple married. And we can see that James did not die. So they were probably divorced, meaning he didn't die before she appears to be married in 1902 to her next husband, William. If you look on James and Elizabeth, the children, James and Margaret, both have the Osmond last name. And that's the name of the second husband. We'll look more into that as we look at the second one. Okay, so now looking at the second marriage, William's 30, Elizabeth is 33, so she's a little bit older. The children are about, or the child was born about 3 years after they married, and the child that was born after they married was Oscar because Margaret was already born. And this Margaret is likely the same Margaret above. And her last name probably should be Moyle. And Elizabeth was about 33 years old when Oscar was born. We did see there were two Margarets. They might be the same person. And William was born in Ohio, married in California, died in California. And it looks like Oscar was born in Nevada. So this one we see a lot happening in California, and then they go to Nevada, which is a little unusual, but not impossible. Lots of things that could be done, standardized dates and places, search the census in California, 1900, search marriage and birth records, search Nevada census in 1910, look at the Family Search Research Wiki for Nevada, search birth records to see if you can find one for Oscar, the last child born. Okay, our next one, we have John O'Neill and Damaris Rushton. So John is born in 1813, Damaris in 1827. He is 34 years old and Damaris is 20 when they got married. There is a good chance John could be married before. Now, the reason it's good to know if he could have been married before is we want to look for his family, his previous marriage, and make sure we can document that. Okay, a child was born probably the same year. Actually, the marriage on this is estimated likely that they were married before that first child was born. There seems to be a gap in here. So 2 years between Nancy and Belton. Belton and Charles, we see there's a 5-year gap. Between Charles and Damaris, we see 2 years. Between Damaris and John, we see 2 years. Between John and Mary, we see 3 years between Mary and William, we see 3 years, and between CL, we see 2 years. So the 5-year gap is where I start making note and worrying that there's a child probably missing. Damaris was about 39 when the last child was born. And let's look at our places. John is from South Carolina, died in Texas. Damaris is from South Carolina, died in Texas. We have some children born in South Carolina and some in Texas. Typically, we have 2 there, Charles and Damaris, that seem to be out of order in their birthplaces. I would want to confirm and verify. It is unusual that the family migrated from South Carolina to Texas and then returned back and forth. So again, that one would be something you need to confirm. And so again, our to-do list will be standardized places, look at some census records that could give us some information about birthplaces for the children, 1850, 1860, and 1870. And we could try to find a marriage record in South Carolina. And there are many, many other things. Okay, so these 7 families were examples of how to do a family analysis. The questions that we asked, and there are more, is we looked at the parents' birth years to see how close in age they were. We tried to determine if there could be a second marriage. We wanted to see how soon after the marriage was the birth of a first child. And do the children follow a birth pattern? Are there large gaps in the spacing of the children? If so, is there a child missing? We want to make note of that. Other things, we looked at the birthplaces. Do they follow a normal migration pattern? Does the information make sense? Sometimes we saw duplicates or possible duplicates. There were clues often on where we should search as we looked at the places, and look for those clues and make note of them before you get started in your research. And that's all I have for today. Next time, we will talk about Family Search Research Wiki.